So I think we will start. So my name is Cream Pipito. I am the chair of the Asuncion, Miteria, Austria Value Our Heritage Committee of the University of the Philippines Alumni Association of Wisconsin. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us this evening or this morning, depending on where you're joining us from. The University of the Philippines Alumni Association of Wisconsin holds this event annually to promote and educate on Filipino history and culture. Today, we are excited to bring you a couple of experts on martial law. This is a topic and an event that played a significant part of Philippine history and for which very little is taught in schools and universities. Given what's going on in this world, this topic is also becoming more and more relevant globally. So displayed here is our agenda for tonight. Please note that you can submit your questions through the Q&A function of Zoom. It should be very easy to find within your Zoom controls. I will be watching the questions and we will try to select as many questions as we can for our panelists for the Q&A portion of this evening. We apologize in advance if we don't have enough time for all questions. I'm sure there's going to be plenty to cover in this conversation. So without further ado, let's keep going. I would like to start us off. I would like to welcome Roselle Rogers, who is the president of UPAA-W. Roselle, why don't you share a few words about UPAA-W to our audience?
Absolutely. And good evening, everyone, and good morning to those friends of ours and our panelists who are joining us from the Philippines. So it's our pleasure to welcome you to our Value Our Heritage Symposium. This is hosted by the UP Alumni Association of Wisconsin. Founded in 1974, our organization was formed for the purpose of advancing the core values and principles of our alma mater, the University of the Philippines, in pursuit of excellence. And we are an all-volunteer 501c3 organization, and we fund a scholarship program here and in the Philippines. We also assist in various community services. We participate in the free medical clinic that we did this morning, as well as we promote awareness of our rich Filipino heritage and culture among our members and in the community. So the VOH symposium, like the one we're holding today, is one of the ways that we raise awareness among the public about Philippine society, about Philippine culture, and also relevant issues. In 2024, we will be celebrating our golden anniversary, our 50th year anniversary. That would make 50 years of serving the Filipino community in Wisconsin, 50 years of providing educational programming, 50 years of raising awareness about our culture. And we hope that just like today, you'll be able to join us for the activities that we will have planned and lined up for you. And with that, I'm going to hand this over back to Cream to get our panel discussion started.
Thanks, Roselle. All right, let's dive right in. First, I want to introduce to you our panel moderator. Moderating our discussion today will be Jaime Flores. Jaime, or Beaver, as we call him, is a communication skills instructor at Waukesha County Technical College here in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in development communication from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and completed his Master's of Arts and Communication from the Ateneo de Manila University. He has been living in Wisconsin with his family since 2017. Beaver will moderate this conversation and introduce our speakers. Take it away, Beaver.
Thank you so much, Cream. And may I say, this is definitely an honor to be able to contribute in this way to the association and to the alma mater as well by being a moderator. So I'm very honored to be part of this event. Okay, so like Cream said, we do have two experts in the field of in the topic tonight, which is martial law, and we'll also be talking a little bit about human rights and how just martial law has impacted many different aspects of Filipino society. Our first speaker is May Rodriguez, and she is the executive director of the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani Foundation. Now, I understand some of our attendees might not understand Filipino, so just correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is Bantayog ng Mga Bayani stands for a hero's monument, right? Or a hero's memorial or something like that. Perhaps May can clarify that for us later, but that's my understanding. So May was a third-year student at the University of the Philippines when martial law was declared. She herself is a martial law survivor, and she has also documented hundreds of cases of Filipinos who underwent inhumane treatment during the Marcos regime. May, great to have you. Our next speaker is Mark John Sanchez. So Professor Sanchez is an author and an assistant professor in Asian studies at Vanderbilt University. He teaches courses on Asian American history, Cold War Asia, and Southeast Asian diasporas. He is currently working on a book that focuses on the transnational roots of the anti-Marcos movement. The book would highlight the ways that grassroots Filipino activists led to the formation of a transnational movement and traces how local activists engaged with rights-based organizations, religious groups, the US education system, pro-democracy activists, and leftist groups. Good evening, Mark. Thank you for joining us. All right, so the first part of our webinar is to just first get to know the speakers and how they got involved in martial law. So in the work towards martial law. So I'd like to ask May first, perhaps you can give us a brief background. I know I did introduce you as a martial law survivor yourself, but perhaps there's something else that you can add to that, May?
Yeah, first of all, thank you to the UPAA Wisconsin for this invitation. I was 18 years old when Marcos declared martial law. I was an activist at the University of the Philippines, very fresh, just a year into the activity. So I practically knew very little about politics and so on. But then martial law was declared, and there couldn't be any way to continue the communication, the organizing, and so on. So students had to make a decision how to respond to the new situation. And for me, I went into continued political work, and that meant going underground. And that is where I stayed in that work for practically all, except for the last 2 years of the Marcos regime. So it was political work. And then after the defeat of the Marcos regime, I went into journalism because my idea was so much censorship had tamed the practice of journalism in the Philippines. And so I might try my efforts there. And then after that, I went into consultancy for NGOs in writing and editorial work. And that is how I got pulled in to helping the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani Foundation. I began first as a volunteer in the research group of the foundation. And eventually I was asked to be its executive director in 2015. That's the short of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, May. How about you, Mark? How did you get involved in, or how did you even get interested in studying martial law? And perhaps you can take this as an opportunity to introduce yourself a little bit as well to our attendees.
Sure. Thank you so much, Beaver, and thank you to the leadership team of UPAA-W. And it's an honor to be here speaking with you all tonight. An honor to be speaking alongside May Rodriguez, right? Someone who has done such amazing work in with the Bantayog and beyond that as well. I'm a Filipino American. I was born and raised in Southern California, so I have no direct experience with martial law. But I have been studying the opposition to martial law for the last 10 years, actually, as part of my research. And what really brought me to that research is, as a young man, I started asking myself the question of, why did my parents come to the United States? My parents immigrated to the United States in 1979 and 1980. My mother was a registered nurse for many years. And so I started asking those questions, and I very quickly learned about, for example, the labor export policy of the Marcos government in the mid-70s, and how that encouraged many Filipinos to go abroad. My mom always told me about being sent to places outside of the home, outside of Batangas and outside of Manila, to work as a nurse before she was able to leave the Philippines. And as I started studying martial law, I learned that was an actual policy of the Marcos government for nurses to be able to leave, to go to places like the United States. They had to spend 3 months, 6 months working in a different area of the Philippines. So what really brought me there was this curiosity about my parents' experience and and other Filipinos' experiences. And as I started doing that research, I started to be really inspired by the stories that I would hear about anti-martial law activists. And I was so inspired, and it's something that continues to inspire me today. So I couldn't stop learning about them and studying about them, and trying to learn how they fought and why they fought. And that's been something that I have been pursuing and trying to learn for a long time now. And it has been something that has had a profound influence on me as a thinker and as a person more broadly, because they continue to inspire me. I'll say that.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much, Mark. And perhaps we may get into a little more into detail into the research and the scholarship that goes into martial law studies in the Philippines, particularly. But we'll first, or our next segment is sort of the meat of this webinar, which is really the reason we wanted to chose this as a topic is because we wanted to set the record straight. I know the word fact seems to have there's a lot of contention on what that means nowadays, but we feel that with the both of you to give us some perspective on what the facts were, so finally let's set the record straight. So we'll talk a little bit about martial law. Perhaps May can give us a little, I guess, an abridged version of perhaps what she thinks martial law, or what do you think people understand martial law was? And how did it begin? How did it end? So if perhaps May can give us like a little historical kind of background on martial law, what led to the declaration, and then how did it eventually end? Maybe we can start with May.
Yeah, thank you. But before I go into that, I would like to clarify that I'm trying to move away from the word martial law when the reference is specifically to the Marcos dictatorship. Martial law of course, has such an emotional meaning and also a historical recall, as in people, you say martial law, you remember Marcos. But the thing is, martial law as a political move is in the Constitution. It was in the old Constitution and still is in our present Constitution. So it's actually a government response to extreme situations when the civilian government would be failing, and therefore a military solution, a military leadership would have to come in. And so, but of course, I realize, and me also, I've been using the word martial law, but now that it's in the third decade of looking back, I would really like to promote for myself the use of the word dictatorship. And I'm going to give a background on why it has been so difficult to shift to it. I remember in our time that it was okay to say martial law. You cannot do this anymore. You cannot meet anymore because there is martial law. It is now prohibited to organize in work areas, in the schools, in churches, because there is martial law. If you say that, you will probably not feel threatened. You cannot say, you cannot criticize the government because there is now a dictatorship. So you would be in great trouble if you started saying that. So there is this mental habit created in our minds, my generation that went through it, that makes it okay to say martial law, but makes it definitely risky to say dictatorship. And I feel that that little thing is the indicator that until today, that fear of saying things straight as it is remained. So we are still, as a population, not all, but as a population, hesitant to call it a dictatorship. So I'm trying to develop that, move away from that mental habit,
Right.
and say dictatorship when I mean it. So that's it.
Mhm.
So martial law. The official reason for the declaration of martial law was, Marcos gave two. One was to restore peace and order because there was so much rallies going on. The rumors of Muslim rebellion, the organization of the New People's Army, and so on. That's the first reason. The second, he said, was that he was going to put new order into society. The rich people, the ruling class, had so much power. He said that it was time to break down the power of the ruling people and put the power back to the people, to the masses. And so he was going to create a new society. That was the reason he gave. And of course, it could not be explained why he would in the first place be arresting on the day he declared martial law senators and congressmen, and who were definitely not NPA, not Muslim, and neither were they the super rich people in society. So it was immediately illogical, but those were his two reasons. And I believe the real reason is that he simply wanted to stay in power. He was going to end his presidency the year after, in 1973. So he had to do something in 1972. So that I think was a well thought out, not a decision that he made overnight. He had thought of it, planned for it, studied for it. He had lawyers and generals study it for months and months, and so he knew what he was doing. Do I?
Yes, yes.
Karen?
Yeah, and then how did it eventually end? Like, do you recall how the martial law was finally put to an end?
In the very beginning, people, except for the organized students and workers and a bit of a few professionals, in the very beginning, people were really scared. And some parts of the population were convinced that it was the right thing to do because suddenly the streets were quiet after all. At night there was curfew, so you had no trouble from robbers and so on. So in the very beginning, my parents included were quite happy that this thing, martial law, happened. But very quickly, people realized the real, true implication of the decision of the Proclamation 1081. We did not know the arrests, but eventually we started learning about it, that the camps were being full with political prisoners. And suddenly, this is the thing. So no more schools, no more organizations. So can you imagine, you are probably some of you teachers in social science. So now suddenly you cannot teach what you think should be taught in schools. So when the schools resumed, that teachers could no longer speak as freely. And you had to lie through your teeth in order to survive the situation, or you had to find more creative means of expressing what you want to say. So little by little, people realized the impact on our rights. We did not know, of course, that many more bad things were happening. We did not know yet the massive stealing. We did not know that. We were not very into how Marcos was reshaping the economy by choosing his cronies and putting them into positions of power and privilege. We did not, it just so slowly crept on us. So the thing that we were aware of was that we had lost much of our freedoms. And so by a few years later, some of the senators had started speaking out. I remember senators like Senator Jokno, Senator Rodrigo would go into small church groups, where you may speak out more freely, more frankly. Senator Jokno, 2 years into was detained for 2 years, and so in 1974, when he started receiving visitors into his house for small mass celebrations, and after mass, that group, maybe 10 or 15 people, would talk about what was happening. So in a sense, there were pockets now of organized resistance. Of course, that's still different from what we were doing. We who joined the underground. We were creating a network, and that network was all over the Philippines because some of us went home, went to the provinces, and so we were beginning to create the underground network. And we would connect to our teachers, to our parents, to the churches, and so on. So it was happening all underground. Overground, it was all Bagong Lipunan and Malakas at Maganda and so on. In 1970, of course, it started, the knowledge that things were happening was when a small strike in La Tondena was dismantled. And so people thought, oh, something was going on. Priests also started saying masses. That's all in Manila. And then the basic Christian community organizations started getting organized in the provinces. There was the community-based health program also in the provinces. So slowly, new forms that had not been present before were being organized in the open. Ostensibly to look after people's health and so on, and of course, yes, but they were also networks that freedom fighters were learning to develop so that they can exist in the open. In the meantime, we were still going on with our underground organizations. And what we were doing was we were organizing the students for these flashes of rallies and resistance that would disappear as soon as the police would come and so on. So like that. And then professionals started joining. Before the assassination of Ninoy, in fact, we had a national network of teachers, of bank employees, of church people, of course, lawyers, and so on. That is still a different thing from what was happening with the armed groups. So the militarization in the countryside was creating such a reaction that people were joining the New People's Army and expanding it. The same thing was happening in the Muslim areas. So by the time of the assassination of Ninoy Aquino, there was this national network, not all in coordination with each other, but it was growing and quite fast. In fact, it was quite huge already. But what happened was, after the assassination of Ninoy Aquino, it just couldn't anymore be denied that this government was illegal. This government was not anymore what the people wanted. The people wanted that out. Even in the tamest sense, people just said, "Tama na. That's enough. We've had enough. Let's replace it." That is what led to the flare up of the political opposition that eventually pushed the military groups to join, and eventually Enrile and Ramos, and that is what happened in 1986, the People Power Revolution that ended the dictatorship.
Yeah. Thank you, May.
That in sum.
Right. Okay, thank you for setting the record straight on that. How about you, Mark? I mean, I think that puts you in an interesting position too, because as you said, you were kind of, well, May was speaking more from essentially as a first-hand witness, right, to all of these things, because she was there in the movement. How about you, Mark? Like, as a researcher, a Filipino-American researcher, you're reading basically all these sources about, you know, what martial law was like. What did you find? Anything? Does it corroborate what May has just told us?
Oh, certainly. I would just echo everything that May has just shared. I guess a couple of the sort of like the maybe if we were to offer a quick and dirty historical timeline of the martial law period, and I think May makes a really important point here, right? Because Marcos is first elected in 1965, right? The martial law period only officially lasts from it lasts from 1972 to 1981. So martial law doesn't even encompass the entirety of the Marcos presidency or the Marcos dictatorship. Martial law is declared, as May said, in 1972, right, ostensibly as a response to unrest and as a move for a new society. But May is absolutely correct that this is an effort to extend his term, right? Like, people already knew then that this is what he was trying to do, and he would quickly move to rewrite the Constitution soon after declaring martial law. The declaration of martial law was accompanied by something that we call the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, which meant that the Marcos government could effectively arrest anyone without bringing a charge against them. And this became something that the Marcos government used throughout beyond martial law as well. What we know is during the martial law period, we have 70,000 people arrested, about 35,000 people tortured, over 3,000 people killed, right? And those are what we have documented, and it may be even more than that. Martial law ends, quote unquote, in 1981. In January 1981, Marcos nominally lifts martial law. And the biggest theorization of why this is so is Pope John Paul II visits the Philippines in February 1981. And it appears that there was pressure both from the United States and perhaps from the Vatican that it would not look good if martial law was still in process in the Philippines. But what we know is even after the lifting of martial law, nothing about the Marcos governance really changes. It's only a nominal change, right? In some ways it's a footnote. It doesn't. Yes, you lifted martial law, but political arrests are still happening,
Right.
and dissent is still being kind of controlled. Yeah, and I would just offer that as just kind of some of the other things, but everything that May has shared there is like those are the firsthand experience. What was it like for people? For many middle class families, I would say most of their experience was perhaps with the curfews. But if you had family members or if people were a part of the opposition, this could be a very scary time. And senators were quickly arrested. If you were a student at university, you might show up to class and see people that you had never seen before that that had looked very bulky and strong, like a military person pretending to be a student, which effectively meant that students and teachers were being spied on and seen if they were because schools were seen as the hotbed of the opposition. This is where so much of the resistance to martial law was happening, right? Like especially at a place like the University of the Philippines. So this is where what you would see during martial law. So for some families, like this was something that was welcome, right? Much like today in the Philippines, there are some folks that are interested in what they see as the restoration of order and peace and things like that. But for many others, this was a very challenging time, right? As May mentioned, laborers that were trying to fight for their working rights were often very cruelly handled, like the strike that May mentioned in 1975. They were very harshly put down. Protesters were driven underground, right? And being underground could be a very challenging thing for both activists and their families and loved ones. And senators like Pepe Jokno, yes, he was in prison for 2 years, but it was also in solitary confinement, right? And these experiences of being detained wreaked havoc on people's health, on people's mental and physical well-being. It was, there was it was a very difficult time for those people that were interested in a kind of government that was not fully under the control of one family.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, wow, that's a lot of really interesting. And even for me, that I thought I know much about it already. There's a lot of new information there for me as well. One of the things we wanted to do in this section is kind of shed light as well on some of the kind of, like the disinformation that's going on around. And one of those things, I mean, you and May have shed much light already on human rights, so I think we have a really clear picture of that as well and what the political climate was. But one thing that I keep hearing, especially in social media, is that they say martial law was the glory days, right? So you have the infrastructure, you have a booming economy, right? We were the booming, they say, in these networks, they would say that, or they would claim that the Philippines was in a good place economically. Was that really the case? May or Mark?
I'm not an economist,
Okay.
but in preparation for this forum, I read up on the several readings so I can also be more intelligent about this. The thing is, we didn't know much what was happening in the economy. We were aware that sometimes there was rice shortage, yes. we knew there was building of the big roads. They were being built. Hospitals were being built. Barangay roads were being built. The village roads. So that was all the information that was available to us, because the information was, of course, heavily controlled. So what we know of that time, economy-wise, came out only after, when there was already, when economists were able to study the data, present the data in more or less an objective manner. And so we learned how deeply indebted we are, how all of that infrastructure development was being financed by loans. And so by the time the Marcoses left, we were deep in debt. We also learned, also much later, how the economy was sliced into positions of influence, so that the sugar industry was given to this friend, the coconut industry was assigned to this friend, logging to this friend, mining to this friend, and so on. And so that our economy was being run based only on the interest of these special friends. And part, of course, of the benefits was they were going to the Marcoses. That's how he sliced off parts of it, and he himself got richer and richer. But we did not know that much. Very little information was available to us. So I only know now that it took 2 decades for us to return to that point in time in 1982, when the economy finally started to implode. So we're still just now recovering from that period, from that 2 decades. That's the figure that the economists say. We lost 2 decades of development. And maybe that's oversimplifying it, because still the coconut levy, which is the batch of taxes that the government, Marcos government, took from the coconut farmers, they have not been returned. And that's huge, because the coconut farmers were impoverished. They were practically living to pay the taxes, and yet those taxes, they have not been returned. So economics-wise, we have not really restored. The justice has not been given to the farmers. And we are still, I heard, still not fully paid from the loans. So those who were born in 1986, when Marcos had gone, when the Marcos family had gone, that's 30 years. Now when they are maybe now 10 years productive, they've graduated and started earning, they're paying for the Marcos debts. Those who had not been born under the dictatorship. So I guess I'm saying that my information and my insights, they're secondhand, but they are born by present data and my own experience. And that's it. We lost a lot economy-wise, and we have not been fully able to recover from the plunder and the abuse of our economies.
Thank you, May. Mark, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, certainly. I'm also not an economist, but I'm happy to add a few things here. Indeed, like leading Philippine economists have debunked this idea that these were the golden years, right? Oftentimes, folks that are talking about this being the golden years will cite a selective use of GDP growth, and but if you actually chart this GDP growth against preceding years and against subsequent years, as well as what the expected GDP growth would have been, right? Like you actually see that it's a lower GDP growth under the Marcos period versus like the relative expectation. And then regarding the infrastructure argument, right? It's often the case with disinformation is that there's a little bit of truth in the lie, right? There was, of course, infrastructure development in the Philippines, right? But there was much more, there was much more taking off of the top of like the money. There was much more kind of theft of money. To speak a little bit about the loans that May was talking about a little bit. These loans were from the World Bank and the IMF. And what these loans were referred to as there were structural adjustment loans, right? They were loans that were given to the Philippines with a lot of strings attached, right? And these strings are like, the loans are important because, you know, that's money that Marcos and his cronies stole. But the strings that were attached to the loans are also important as well, because some of the strings included, right, a demand that the Philippines shift to different technologies of producing rice. And, you know, as we know of the Philippines, like the Philippines has gone from like a net exporter of a rice to now a net importer of rice since then. And these are things that have had a long lasting impact in addition to the money that was stolen, right? So some of that money that comes in are used for infrastructure, right? Like, of course, we see the cultural center of the Philippines, you know, the Heart and Lung Center, and all of these big things. But much more of that money, you know, didn't go to infrastructure. And all of that money should have been reserved for the Philippines and the Philippine people, not for a particular family, right? All of that money should have gone to infrastructure, and it did not.
Thank you. So now we sort of talk about currently, I mean, since we've already opened the discussion on disinformation, I'm curious to know from either of you, do you have any insight on how exactly did we get to this place where sort of this image of martial law, when essentially, like what May was saying, it was essentially a dictatorship, right? How this idea of martial law or a dictatorship has somehow been sanitized, right? Do you have any insight on that? Like, I know some sources would say that this was a sort of a well-planned like image, you know, rebuilding kind of situation. So like based on what you've learned or what you've, the information that you've gathered, how did this exactly happen?
I'm
Mark,
interested to hear from Mark first.
Yeah.
Sure. If we are going to talk about the restoration of the Marcos family, we have to start with what happens right after the EDSA protests, right? The Marcos family is not immediately brought to justice. What happens? The Reagan administration facilitates the escape of the Marcos family into exile into Hawaii, right? And they go to Hawaii like right in 1986. You know, there are some court cases brought against the Marcoses, but they are not effectively held responsible for, you know, for their crimes against the Philippine people. And that's where it begins, right? From there, you know, we see, of course, like, you know, Imelda returns, and in the 1992 election, she gets like, I think in the double digits of percentage points in the presidential elections. So, you know, there's already a strong base there. You know, and I think, you know, as soon as they arrived in Hawaii, they were plotting their return, right? Historians, journalists that would go and interview the Marcos family could already see that the Marcos family was very interested in figuring out ways to return to the Philippines and to return to power, right? So, you know, there are certainly ways that, you know, in recent years, the Marcos family has been very savvy at utilizing social media in terms of restoration. There is also, you know, I would say, you know, the ways that Marcos, the Marcos history and martial law and the Marcos dictatorship are taught, you know, within Philippine schools, but frankly, anywhere in the world, right? Like does not really account for, you know, what the Marcos period was like, and it kind of leaves things quite open for a restoration of a particular nostalgia for the Marcos family. So I would say that there are a number of factors that are going on in terms of the restoration of the Marcoses, not least of which is, there is a very real frustration that many Filipinos have felt with government recently in the last decade or 2 decades, and some of them have channeled that frustration into kind of a nostalgia for some part of the past. So there are a number of things going on, right? Like I wouldn't point to any singular reason. Like all of these interpretations have some important factors within them. But this is what makes, I think, the problem so challenging, right? Like it's not like a situation where if we had just changed one thing, it would have all been better. There were a lot of different things that we have to reckon with, right? Like the role that the United States has played in the Philippines and in supporting Marcos. The sort of the ways that social media and tech operate within the Philippines. The frustration with with recent governments of many Filipinos, and also the sort of ways that the Marcoses have in many areas of the Philippines, in many places, they never actually lost their support, right? Like even as soon as 1986, there were many people that were hoping for the Marcoses' return, and so I would say that there's a lot of factors going on, and yeah.
Hey, do you share the same insight?
Yeah, Mark said pretty much what I would have said too, except I would add that, so the role of the American government, the educational system, what has become an increasing economic inequity that is making people frustrated and looking for a time in the past when it seemed like things were better. But I would also add one thing. It is important also to look at the scheme of economic power in the Philippines. Even before Marcos and in Marcos's time, the economic control of much of the resources in our country is in the hands of a few. And those few, sometime in the time of Marcos, they changed, but still they were in the hands of a few. After the Marcoses left, the personalities changed again, but still in the hands of the few. And so when you are looking for genuine economic changes, that gets threatened. So the sins of the Marcoses, they couldn't be exposed too much, and in all its honesty and frankness, because those sins are not theirs alone. So if they control this and that industry, the same situation exists today. And if you analyze it in its entirety, they are going to be threatened by any genuine changes. And that is why the Marcoses, they have support. It's not the important thing to remember is that people are drawn into it only because there is actual economic support for the return of the Marcoses by the very rich people that we sometimes trust to handle the economy better. So who gave the economic support to the political campaign, for instance, who supported that campaign. So the Marcoses do have support, but I would put the responsibility on the existing economic structure. And so we have to be clear-headed about it, because I call it the unfinished revolution. So the poor people, they joined the people power revolution. They joined the resistance to the dictatorship because they were hoping that things would change also for them. They were hoping that maybe we do not have to send our children abroad to work abroad so that we will have more jobs here. They were hoping that maybe we will not be threatened with our homes. We will be earning more and so on. But these things, they were not happening. But, well, to a large extent, they were not happening. So there is this disenchantment, right? But where do you, for instance, why we all say that the educational system is partly responsible for the ignorance of our young people on the realities of the dictatorship. So we all know that, we all say that, we all hear that. But why? Why 3 decades had gone and still we are not, I'm sure we are not lacking for curriculum writers, for people who are able to pedagogically put it into lessons so that they are fit for elementary school and preschool and high school and college students. We are not lacking for academics who can do that. But the question has to be asked, why? 30 years, 30 and a half, 35 years since, we are still not able to teach it in our public school system. And it is being taught in private schools effectively. So at the Bantayog ng mga Bayani Foundation where I work, students from private schools seem much better educated about the lessons of the dictatorship than students who come from public schools. So it is real that 85%, that's the public school system, 85% of our students are being taught the incomplete, that's the best thing, the incomplete, or even the very opposite of what happened. So why? You have to ask, why is the educational system still like that? So the logical thing is it's still under the control of people who would not be interested in uprooting the lies.
Thank you. And that's a good sort of segue to my next question is, now that we've talked about basically, the facts behind martial law, we want to talk about the work that you're doing now, right? So with Bantayog, for example, May, could you explain to us a little bit, like what do you feel now is your role as Bantayog, as the executive director? How do you how do you work on making sure that the information is curated well? Could you shed a little more light on that?
Yeah. Our main mission is very small. When it was organized, Bantayog ng mga Bayani Foundation, the people behind it were thinking like this. When the new generation has arrived, after all the people who went through the bad experiences of the dictatorship will have been gone or will be unable to share the memories, it is very human, it is very natural that the memories will be dulled. The pain, the fears, the worries will be dulled. And so we need to do something to make that, to at least combat that. And they did not go into writing histories and into other things, but they decided that the right thing to do for them was to write small stories. The stories of bravery and resistance, because stories are appealing. Okay, so and if you talk about a life story, there will be relatives, there will be families, there will be classmates who will attest to that story, to the truth of that story. So they decided they were going to do research, recognize, and keep on honoring the heroes of the resistance to the dictatorship. And I think that was very wise for the people at the Bantayog ng mga Bayani, because I realize now heroes are powerful stories. In fact, me having come from the background of the left underground, when I read the story of the two worker organizers from Seattle who were assassinated because they were supporting the struggle in the Philippines. It woke up something in me and made me realize the resistance wasn't just by us, by the students, the young ones who knew very little what they were doing. We were not alone. People in the States who could decide not to do anything, they were doing something also. They were supporting. So we were not alone. Those kinds of stories were very inspiring. I think the people, the organizers of Pantayag ng mga Bayani thought that this would be the thing to do, to write, to find the stories of inspiration. So you're talking now, that is our main work. We are not really, we are fighting disinformation by talking about the inspiring stories that cannot be denied because there are families, there are, So, but also we are into a second mission, in which is to keep on telling the people the stories of the big picture of the dictatorship, so that to help correct the gaps in the educational system.
And just out of curiosity, Mail, 50 years since martial law, are you still learning about news stories? Are there news stories surfacing? Are you finding some of those?
Yes. Yeah. Especially now that we celebrated the 50th, people just are encouraged to tell their own little secret stories they've never told before, and so on. Yes, they are still being told. And also stories that were being told in smaller circles are now being told in bigger circles. Like there was a, if you are familiar with the first quarter storm incident of the 1970s, this is the time that Metro Manila erupted in many rallies and demonstrations to protest the presence of the Americans in Vietnam and so on. There, we discover little things like this also happening in the provinces. So yes, many stories are still being told and retold and in bigger audiences.
How about you, Mark? Can you share with us a little bit more about the scholarship behind this? Are you the only one doing research on martial law, or do you have like a network of people who are interested in this subject? Oh, you're
No, I'm absolutely not the only one. There are in the United States alone, I know that there are at least 6 or 7 other scholars that are, writing on different aspects of martial law, right? He's like a colleague named Josen Masangkay Diaz, who teaches in San Diego, is about to publish a book about the sort of connections between U.S. policy and the martial law period. A colleague named Joy Sales is working on martial law in a longer context of Philippine activism. Another colleague named Karen Hanna is working on queer folks and the intimacies that they formed during their anti-martial law activism. Another one named Sharon Kinsaat is writing about anti-martial law activists in the Netherlands, in Western Europe, in the United States. So I do consider myself fortunate to be among a really wonderful cohort of scholars that are it is, I think, there's this kind of generation of scholars that are really working to kind of continue telling these histories and sharing how these histories are important to Filipino Americans, to Filipinos, and to Filipinos elsewhere in the diaspora, right? And like to kind of think about a little bit of the ways that we are connected and the ways that we might kind of stay connected, in other contexts or in other times where we might need to do such work.
And are there any challenges that you're facing as researchers studying about this?
There may be at some point, but the thing that I would always respond to that is, I see my responsibility to research, to listen, and to amplify the work of folks that are on the ground right now in the Philippines. Because I'll say, if I'm facing challenges, the folks that are doing the work in the Philippines are facing much more challenges, and I think it is in some ways the privilege that I have of being in the United States, but also the responsibility that I think those of us that are in the United States that care about the Philippines have to continue amplifying those voices, because that's what the activists that I studied did, right? They knew that they lived in the United States. They knew that the United States had a role in having Marcos maintain his power, and that they saw their responsibility as to spread awareness in the United States, to kind of make it hard for the Marcos family to visit the United States, like little things like that, to put pressure. And because there are things that we cannot do because of where we are, but there are also things that we can do to contribute because of where we are.
So this kind of brings us to the implications part, right, of our webinar theme. So we've talked about the facts. You've talked about like the work that you do. What are the implications now? And I think the biggest implication at this point, or correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest implication is that the son of the dictator is the current president. So maybe I'll ask May, does this impact your work with the Bantayog in any way? Or are you, business as usual?
No, it's not business
No,
as usual. But I would approach it in with more layers. Number one, we think that of course we are. How can you expect help from government now? At the very least, you cannot. But government is also not that monolithic, so you can still continue to work with the other agencies. But definitely, whereas we had such a warm support, we received such warm support from the government of Noynoy Aquino and mother Cory Aquino, now we cannot expect that. But maybe worse than that is we find ourselves always more in the defensive. Like we are always asking, is this going too much? Is this can we still survive this if we do something like this, and so on? So we are more thinking more defensively these days. But also there's another layer. The just past May elections created such a huge energy in discovering what happened in the past, because you cannot deny it that vote for Leni Robredo really was a vote for good governance, right? So so much had happened in the past that people did not know, that we are also at present very much challenged in trying to get that audience, connect our story with the story of the present. And we find so much opening with the what they call the pink crowd. They are so curious to know more about what happened in the past. And they are able to, with connection to us, they're able to connect the present and the past. So we're seeing it in several angles, the challenge of the second Marcos presidency.
I want to bring up something that has happened recently. Marcos Jr., Philippine President Marcos Jr. was invited by the Asia Society in New York City. I believe that was as part of his itinerary, right? He even visited the United Nations and he did a speech there. So I just wanted to ask, maybe I'll start with Mark. because that invitation by the Asia Society was actually, it received some backlash from some Filipino American writers and activists. And I don't know if you're comfortable answering this yourself, but do you share that sentiment? So I'll just start with that.
I'll start with I was a signatory to
Oh, okay.
that letter.
Right.
I'll say, it was perhaps not surprising at all how quickly the United States and important institutions congratulated and welcomed Bongbong Marcos as the new head of state. It's not surprising also because, his own father had very close relationships with almost every US president that held office during the time that Marcos ruled over the Philippines. I was very disappointed to see Asia Society welcome Bongbong Marcos. The Asia Society has done really important and critical work in scholarship and in the arts. And the welcoming of Marcos, I think, was unfortunate, but more than just about the Asia Society, it's a signal to us, I think, about how much and how quickly the international community is willing to welcome Bongbong Marcos with open arms. It is then, I think, and this is why I was a signatory to that letter. It is then, I think, the duty of scholars, of activists, of intellectuals, of writers to continuously remind people that Bongbong Marcos, did not have his hands clean of the crimes of the martial law period. That Bongbong Marcos was, during the martial law period, he was not, the child that he often portrays himself to me. He was literally the vice governor and then the governor of Ilocos Norte, right? Like, this is not, this was not like the toddler that he sometimes seems to suggest that he was. And also that Bongbong Marcos has very literally promised to continue the legacies of his father. And so so that is why I chose to be a signatory of that letter. It is not necessarily about the Asia Society specifically, because I know that they have done fantastic work. But I do want to signal to these organizations that are inviting the Marcoses that this is not something that the Filipino American community that I am a part of wants to readily accept and see, right? And this is something that people did during the Marcos period, because during the father's period, right? Like, for example, one of the things that Ferdinand and Imelda often tried to visit the United States and often wanted to have these associations with powerful leaders to signal their power to the Philippines and to the rest of the world, right? And Filipino American activists, wrote letters, they protested, they petitioned against this, knowing that it would still happen, but wanting to signal, right, that this is not something. This is not something that the Filipino American people would stand for, and I think that is important. And this, did result in some pretty significant changes during the Ferdinand Marcos period, and I hope it does here too, right? For example, Ferdinand Marcos tried to make a donation to Tufts College for like a named chair, and activists really fought against that and forced Tufts University to not accept that donation. And I think, these efforts at legitimizing and sanitizing the family history do need to be combated to some extent.
Okay. So now I'll probably go just ask maybe a couple more questions to wrap up, because we would like to have some time for our attendees, our audience.
I think May wanted to chime in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go. Sorry, May. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Allow the interruption. I'd like to tell the story of one interview of Imelda Marcos with the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines in the early 80s. And this was our first, my inclination of how Imelda thought, her thought processes. She was interviewed by the FOCAP, that this is the foreign correspondents here in Manila. And she started discussing about how the Philippines had over it a hole in the sky that makes it a very special country. It receives energy from that hole in the sky. And that's why we are a very beautiful people. And so that's why we are looking for beautiful leaders. And we support her because she is beautiful and so on. So I guess that story makes me think twice about the matter of giving platforms to them. I think that maybe if there is a way to make them show themselves for what they really are, which is going to be difficult if we do it here in the Philippines, because they will start to be controlling our media sooner or later. Then maybe if you do it outside and expose them for all their inanities and their lack of sensitivity and so on, then maybe that would be helpful also. I'm not saying that I don't know the politics of Asia Society and you, but yes, I think that maybe a critical platform would be very helpful to the Filipinos here in the Philippines.
So basically, May, you're saying that's something that the Filipino-American community, since, you know, obviously now in the Philippines, the media is sort of controlled and all that. So those platforms should essentially come from outside of the Philippines.
We're hoping.
We're hoping, yeah. How about you, Mark? Do you agree that that's one thing that the Filipino-American community can do to contribute?
You know, it's I was watching the election very closely, and you know, I always was hoping that Bongbong would agree to a debate, right? Like that he would finally debate with the other candidates, because I do recall in the 2016 elections watching Bongbong in the vice presidential debate, and you know, he did not do very well. Yeah, like, and you know, and I think that's a reason why his campaign wanted to avoid the debates, right? Like, you know, I'm sympathetic to May's suggestion there. I like, it is my fear though that his people will never put him in a position where he can be actually critically questioned. But I you know, with some of the videos and interviews that we have seen of them, like, you know, in some ways, like it would be good to kind of hear them actually have to explain policy points and like you know, really articulate a vision for the Philippines beyond very simplistic platitudes that they have been using.
And I think, speaking also of the of the Filipino-American community, I do, and this could be just me, but maybe Mark can confirm this or May can confirm this, that you know, this information is also happening in the diaspora, right? Within the diaspora. So we would find ourselves in conversation with our relatives here in the United States about the same, you know, like there would be those who really believe that the martial law years were golden years, you know, that kind of, so it has somehow reached the diaspora. So how would you suggest, what would be the approach that you think, if, you know, some of us would like to set the record straight like we did tonight, what do you think might be the good approach, best approach? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm a teacher, so I have to believe. I have to believe that this kind of conversation can happen. I am worried in some ways that social media might not be the venue through which these kinds of convincing changes can happen. I think to the extent that I have seen, some changes happen, it has come in people-to-people conversations and in conversations where we really listen to each other and hear what people's gripes are. What, why do you feel like, X or Y government has failed you? This is true of the Marcos government. It is true of different administrations in the United States, right? Like, what is it that where have you felt left behind in things? And really kind of being attentive to that. Maybe not going in with the mindset of I am going to convince you that I am right, and going in with the mindset of, I want us to understand like what common ground we might find and how we might agree to on a vision of the world that is perhaps a little bit better. I know that that's not a satisfactory answer to a lot of people. But I just don't know. I just don't know that social media is going to do it.
Right.
I don't, and I do want to believe that we can still meet, find common ground, and build something new. Maybe that's a little too optimistic of me, but I'll continue trying that way.
How about May in the Philippines, in the homeland? I mean, are these conversations happening? Are there, exchanges between those who believe in the disinformation and those who know the facts?
Yes, I believe they are happening, but I think like Mark thinks that we should do more outside of social media than inside. I'm thinking of social media now as an arena where you try to establish territory, or maybe like it's a battle. But when you do want to win hearts and minds, it's not there that you should be doing it. You should look at your neighbors and your friends and your family who are, you do not know it, but they're being won over by the negative propaganda. So I think that's where, and one small victory is better than creating more enemies in social media, right? So if you are able to at least, like in Bantayog, we do invite students in a class, whether or not they are of any mind about the Marcos era. So when we host them, it is always of the assumption that one or two or maybe even more would be pro that time, would see that time was the golden era. So you some kind of less passionate presentation, and maybe a more objective presentation of the pros and cons, and how we are still recovering. We have not recovered. We're still picking up the pieces from that time. A more objective presentation of that sometimes succeeds in creating a crack. It doesn't have to be a conversion, but that belief is cracked, that like this high school student will say, is it right what I've known all along? So it doesn't have to be a conversion. It just needs a suggestion that maybe you should rethink the sources of your information.
Okay. So I'll throw my last question to May, which is, I'm going to ask May about what does Bantayog need at the moment. But before you answer that, I'd like to remind our audience to type in their questions in the if you have any questions or maybe even comments about what you just heard tonight. This is a great opportunity to again, express your own thoughts about this about the topic, and May and Mark can give us their answer. So yeah, so I just want to remind everyone, take this time to type your questions. So so May, I guess let's use this opportunity, since you already mentioned that, Bantayog is kind of in a interesting position now, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
What does Bantayog need at the moment, and how can people help?
There is no avoiding it. Our financial needs are at the biggest these days. We are privately funded, almost completely privately funded by sympathetic business groups. And we have lost that. Because of the pandemic, the business groups that had been supporting us are also struggling. They're still struggling. So we have been raising funds for our operations from friends for a year now. We've used up all our savings. But this is the thing. What we would like, if you've heard of being not the new normal, but the better normal, what we want to do is to create a better Bantayog. So we are beginning plans for a rehabilitation of Bantayog so that children can can be safer, older people can be safer and be there and spend the weekend there, morning there. So we want a better Bantayog. And for that, we are going to be raising money for it. And that's probably where you can help a lot.
So fundraising is really the biggest biggest need for now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, May and Mark, for again honoring us with your presence tonight and for answering our questions. And then maybe let's turn to our audience. Cream, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so I would just encourage the participants the attendees to please submit your questions in the Q&A, in the Q&A control of Zoom. So we do have one question, Beaver. So in Bantayog, May, how do you vet the stories that you're featuring in Bantayog?
In the beginning, in the 1980s, the people who started Bantayog went through all the human rights organizations and created a database. They had a database of around 2,000 names, and that was a mix of victims, as in victims who were killed but had no reason for being killed. So that was out of our own mission. We picked names who were obviously fighting, who were part of the resistance, who knew the risks or who took the risks despite what it might mean to their families, their careers, their own safety, and so on. So we had a database. But also some were very obvious, like they were all over the network and so on. So we had the first 65, very easy 65. And then the research started. So from that 2000, it keeps growing because as we learn more information and people also die from old age and disease, so they get added to the list. So now we have a database of 3,000. Some groups they nominate. We have, of course, a network, a huge network all over the Philippines that helps us both gather the names or gather the information about them. There's a year-long research, and then after we're done towards the middle of the year, it gets written up. Whoever from the long list, we shorten it. There's a shorter list, and that shorter list is now submitted to a screening committee that decides which is appropriate to be submitted to the main deciding committee, our board. That is the final decision, where is the final decision is made and then announced every November.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Do we have,
Thank you. Yes, Beaver, we have one more. How do you think we can make the younger generation be more aware of this very important part of the Philippine history in order for them to decide better for their future? As someone who supported the EDSA revolution and was there with our countrymen, I'm very concerned after the election result last May. So the question is about how we can make the younger generation be more educated, be more informed about the dictatorship, about martial law.
The teacher.
This is this is I think a tricky one. I'll speak to perhaps students in the United States. I think Filipino American youth, they have a number of experiences and a number of different relationships with the Philippines. I think I think there are our youth here in the U.S. are like facing all kinds of issues like in the U.S. as well, and I think one of the keys is to kind of encourage a connection with the Philippines and with what is going on in the Philippines. Sometimes that's an openness with the stories and experiences that parents have had, right? Like, I know many parents that are in the of Philams that hadn't really shared with their kids that they were protesters, that they were activists, right? Like, and that might be kind of a start to those conversations. There is also, I just saw earlier today, there's wonderful Filipino American networks throughout the United States. For example, there is an organization called the Bulasan Center, which is based out of the University of California, Davis. They do the Bulasan Center is like a hub for undergraduate Filipino American research. And they have an internship program. And you don't have to be a student in the UC system to be part of this internship program. And their internship program, I think during the pandemic, drew hundreds of Filipino Americans from all across the United States. And, the first step of the conversation wasn't, by the way, there's a dictator, like there's the dictator's son that is in the Philippines. The first step is like, what are you experiencing as a Filipino American? Like, what is your relationship to the Philippines? And, by meeting the students and meeting our youth where they are at, I think that can go a long way in helping us work to help them understand, some of the bigger socio-political contexts that we're worried that might be facing them in their future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we
For
have
my part, I think maybe because of the years of neglect here in the Philippines, some of us want to feed the information like those young people will be going in indigestion and will be reacting to all the efforts that we want to feed, all the information that we want to feed them. And I think that may be the wrong way to do it. Like Mark says, you have to start small. Like I hope my daughter won't be listening, but for many years I would ask my daughter, do you want to know what happened to me or to us during the time of the Marcos dictatorship? When they were younger, I would never talk to them. But when they were more adult already, when they were in their professions, I would sometimes find occasion to ask them the question. And always they would, my one daughter who now we live together, she would say, but why will you want me to know how much you suffered? So she did not want to know more because she knows that the family suffered. the grandparents suffered, my parents, because of all the, well, you suffer when your children suffer, right? So when we were in prison, when we were tortured, when they saw the battered bodies, my parents suffered. So my daughter would say, why will I want to know what happened to you? I don't want to know. So there's a trauma that she carries from she wasn't even born, but she has that. So my insight from that is that you cannot push the information to people who don't want to know it. And yet after, when this campaign against the burial of Marcos in 2015 began, all my 4 children, I have 4 children, all my 4 children started releasing stories in their own social media platforms about my experience. All the time, that experience had been with them, but they refused to open it in their minds. But when the occasion happened, when the occasion came, they decided it was the right time. So I am thinking, now we must go slowly. We must not force people into accepting information that they are not really that ready for. As Mark said, start with something that really concerns them, that will really make them think or start to think about this matter without forcing them into the more uncomfortable decisions, political decisions. That, I think, is a good idea. Let the young people absorb it in their own time, but make the effort. I mean, some people really did not want to talk about it because they were too traumatized. So that, I hope, will also not happen anymore. Let us start to make the effort.
Thank you, May. We have one more question, Beaver. Maybe this is the last one for the night. So someone is asking if May, you are familiar with the TFDP, or the Task Force Detainees Philippines. And
Yes, of course.
and if can you speak a little bit of that work, of their work?
Okay. Task Force Detainees of the Philippines was organized by the Association of Major Religious Superiors. So it had mostly nuns at the start. That was in 1974. I am quite familiar with the work of Task Force Detainees because I worked there for a year after I got released from prison. So if Bantayog has documents, most of what we have, we got from organizations like Task Force Detainees and other organizations that existed during that time. Bantayog started its existence in 1986. Task Force Detainees 1974. So for researchers, the primary sources are with Task Force Detainees. They had nuns visiting political prisoners. They would receive letters. I myself, when I was there, I would receive letters. And this is now painful to imagine. I would receive letters, I would retype the letters and burn the original because for safety, and because the handwriting can be discovered and the source of it would be punished. So we would burn the original, but the primary sources are all with the Task Force Detainees. They covered missions, fact-finding missions. They would look for missing prisoners or missing bodies. They would also cover rallies. They would send delegations to the offices of the military to work for releases and so on. So they all have been working since 1974. Yeah.
Thank you, May. One last question, but this might be a meaty one. Since you were talking about stories, May, someone is wondering if you can share your experience, if you feel comfortable sharing your experience, your detention, what was that like, and how did it happen? Why were you put in that situation?
Yeah, I can tell a bit of it. It's not very easy. It's always never easy. In 1974, I was, as I told you before, I was with in the underground organizing students for like these little things like writing slogans on masking tape and putting them and sticking them in the sides of jeepneys and in pews in the church and so on. So we were a bunch of students and we were arrested. We were about 30 in that bunch. We call it a fire, where a series of arrests, one arrest leads to another, and one person is tortured. That person who is tortured sometimes reveals still another house where there are more activists and so on. So the arrests happen again, torture again, and so it spreads. So we call it a fire. There's a fire going on. So we were about 30 who were arrested from several houses, and we were all of us tortured. One of us, a courier, he works primarily carrying letters from one place to another. He was so heavily tortured that when we saw him, both of his the soles of his feet were burned, were burned with hot iron. So he could not walk by himself, he had to be carried. I saw myself, people going through the electric torture. And I was 20 when that happened. So it was an exposure into the crueler side of humanity. My particular torture happened in the house where I was taken. It was for all of one full night. I was alone, and there were 3 soldiers inside the house because they had taken over the house after they had taken away the activists. They stayed there for a week. I went to visit, and that is where they got me. And so that was a night of torture, sexual, physical, and mental torture. I had my fingers burned, things done to me, to my body. Yeah, beating. They were beating me, a 20-year-old girl. But the thing is, after that experience, I felt that I had become stronger. I was of course a religious person, so I prayed very hard that I would not be adding to the fire by revealing more houses and more individuals, more. So I prayed very hard that I would not be traitor to my comrades and so on. So and I did that. I am still to this day so proud of myself that I did not, despite everything, that I did not tell on my friends. And so after that, my thinking now is that when you are faced with this sudden attack, you think that you are weak. You think that maybe you cannot stand up to the pain or to the shame or to the fear. But I found something in me, resources in me that withstood that. And so at the end of that and after that, when I think of that experience, I think that I grew stronger from that experience. And imagine if they did this to me and if they did this to thousands of others, then they just made us stronger. And in fact, after that, when they released, when I got released, my decision was to return to what I had been doing before. So adversity, and if you handle it right, if you think right, if you are faced with attacks like that, they don't make you weaker, they make you stronger. That's my insight on that experience.
May, thank you so much for sharing that story. I don't think we can ever imagine what that was like. So we really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess that is all the time we have for now. And I think that's a nice sort of way to end this webinar. Just the message that we keep pushing on, right? And we just make these stories make us stronger rather than make us feel weak or so just keep pushing on, and doing the work, right? So on that note, thank you so much, May Rodriguez, for honoring us tonight with your insight and your stories. Thank you as well, Mark Sanchez, for gracing us with your presence tonight and your really the important work that you do. We're so glad that you are, and along with your other fellow scholars, you are doing this work as well, so thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Beaver, for
Right.
moderating the
course.
discussion. So for all our attendees, just a few quick notes. One is that we will post the recording of this webinar in the UPAA-W website. So that's upaaw.org. In addition to that, we will also post links to Mark's information in Vanderbilt, and also a link to Bantayog ng Mga Bayani Foundation. And as May mentioned, the organization and their work need your support. So with that, thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you and good night. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, May. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
For Cream and
Good evening.
Rosel.